Welcome to Nada Yada Island.
We're back on the Nada Yada Island Confessions Show. Benny is about to tell us how he found two loves. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks to Metro, I found iPhone 12 and Apple Watch SE.
At Metro, get the perfect match of both iPhone 12 with 5G and Apple Watch SE for only $99.99. You heard that right. Both for just $99.99. Holidays with Nada Yada Yada. Only at Metro by T-Mobile.
Bring your number and ID, sign up for Metro Flex Plus, and add a watch line. Not available if you're with T-Mobile or been with Metro in the past 180 days. Limit 2 per account.
Hi, everybody. It's Deesha. The following is a member bonus episode of Ursa Short Fiction. We're excited to share this free teaser, but if you'd like to listen to the whole thing, become an Ursa member today in Apple Podcasts or at ursastory.com/join. You'll help us keep this show going and get access to exclusive episodes. That's ursastory.com/join. Thanks for your support.
Traditionally publishing whatever and there they go.
That dog's like, no to self-publishing. No.
Take two.
He's like,
Very
I take
elitist.
issue.
Very elitist.
Mr. Bingley hates self-publishing.
Hi, Dawnie.
Hey, Deesha.
And welcome everyone to Ursa Short Fiction, where we geek out on our favorite short stories and writers. I'm Deesha Philyaw, author of The Secret Lives of Church Ladies.
And I'm Dawnie Walton, author of the final revival of Opal and Nev.
And today we've got another special episode dedicated to the business of publishing. We know our listeners love to discover great stories, but many of you are also writers yourselves, so we wanted to use this show to help demystify the entire publishing process, from writing stories and novels to finding an agent and ultimately getting your work published.
And if you're planning to go the traditional publishing route, that also means finding an agent to represent you and your work. Today, we're excited to welcome our own agents to the show, Danielle, Chiotti, and PJ Mark. And I think this episode will be so revealing, not just for writers who are thinking about getting an agent, but for readers and listeners who want a better perspective on why certain books make it to your local bookstore shelves and why others don't. So Danielle, who's Deesha's agent, has worked in publishing for 20 years. Formerly an editor, she joined upstart Crow Literary when it was founded in 2009, and she has represented numerous award-winning books. She specializes in upmarket and literary fiction, young adult and middle grade fiction, as well as select nonfiction. In addition to Deesha's work, Danielle's clients include Brian Broom, author of Punch Me Up to the Gods, and Nicole Deep Collier, author of Just Right Jillian and The Many Fortunes of Maya, among many others.
And Donnie's agent is PJ Mark from Janklow and Nesbitt, who has represented countless award-winning works of literary fiction and narrative nonfiction. In addition to Donnie's fabulous work, PJ's clients include Deshaun Charles Winslow, Tyreek White, Joseph Earl Thomas, Eileen Miles, and so many others.
And this is a conversation that is just like incredible, enlightening, hilarious. There's a special guest named Mr. Bingley who you will learn about, and we're so excited to present it to you. So with that, let's jump into our conversation with Danielle Chiotti and PJ Mark. Danielle and PJ, welcome to Ursa Short Fiction.
So excited you all are here.
Thank you for having us. This is very exciting.
Very exciting.
Yeah. Okay, so this is our first question, and it starts, both of you are white. Both of you are white.
I was reading these. I was like, wow, all right. Right
So
off the bat.
this is how we do it, Ursa. We are 10 toes down and we keep it 100. Both of you are white, and you both rep a number of writers who aren't white, like us. And Danielle, over the years, prospective clients of yours have asked to speak to me or other current clients of color to ask what it's like having a white agent and if you get it, in short. So as an agent, and this is a question for both of you, what kinds of things do you consider for your clients of color, given the whiteness of publishing and the attendant challenges?
My first thought when I read that question was, what do you say when they ask if I get it? Because I don't know. I don't know what I don't because I'm white. So what I try to do is just keep in mind that I want to lead with an open heart and make sure that on behalf of my clients, when they're expressing a concern to me, I'm listening to that with my whole heart and saying, okay, this is something that you need to know. This is something that's real for you. This is something that you need to be educated on, or you need me to advocate on your behalf, and taking that really, really seriously. I never want one of my clients to feel like I'm not taking their concerns or their questions seriously because there's, I don't know, some kind of barrier with my whiteness, right? And I have had a couple of situations with colleagues or with editors when I'm bringing certain questions or I'm talking about certain issues, and I've had people just kind of try to wave a question away or say, well, why does that matter? And I have to come in and say, well, it does matter. It matters a lot. So I need you to speak to it, and I need you to answer to it, because I need to be able to take that back to my client.
Yeah, I'm really glad actually that you led with listening, because that's when I was thinking about this question too. I was thinking that often it's listening to what is being said and not being said. In conversations, we're both, of course, making sure the author is valued properly and in advances and in marketing publicity. But the harder thing is making sure that the author is being heard and actually understood, and that they're saying what they need, and that we're able to translate that to the team. And it's the subtle things, I think, in these relationships and the teams that you have to be attuned to, and for the writer to make sure that they feel understood, and that that they're allowed to succeed in the same ways that white writers are allowed to succeed, and that they're also allowed to fail in the same way that white writers are allowed to fail.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, that's such an important point. And, I just want to say with you, PJ, it was so meaningful to me when I was making that agent decision at a time where, and we're going to talk about this in a second, I feel like there's moments where like Black writers are hot and then there's moments where we're not, right? And when I was shopping Opal and Nev, I feel like there was sort of that kind of hunger for Black voices that is maybe not there anymore. But we'll talk about that in a second. And PJ, for me, it was so important to look at your list and see that you represented many writers of color for many years. And I really appreciated that I could talk to clients of yours and understand how you are with your authors. So about that market question, like I said, I've had lots of conversations with Black writers, many of them in the PJ Mark camp, and we all kind of commiserate that. We're kind of relieved that we're not debuting right now, because it just seems to me that some really talented writers I know who are trying to sell their books are having a really, really hard time. And I'm trying to get a bead on if I'm losing my mind here or if that's accurate. Do you feel there's times where the market is changing in that way? And how do you kind of navigate that with writers?
There are significant challenges in publishing right now. And I do think things are harder than they have been. It's everything from like production costs being up and consumer sales being down, and editorial teams are overwhelmed, and publishers are understaffed, and everyone is working remotely, and it's just terrible for getting business done in an efficient way. And it also feels like that review coverage is not as robust. And so I think that it's easier sometimes for editors to say no. There's also just a ton of agents and a ton of stuff on submission. And I think that editors being overwhelmed is the main thing, and how hard it is to push something through to acquisition. Yeah, it's been a hard year. It's been a hard couple of years. There's like, everyone's feeling the reverberations of the pandemic. Everyone's feeling the impact of war and social issues. And it's just hard. People are just, I feel like, especially this year, pretty overwhelmed.
Yeah.
I think that's really accurate. And I think that in publishing, we watch the pendulum swing back and forth in terms of what's selling or what's easier to sell and what's not easier to sell. And then, of course, you have, everybody begins acquiring books that are very similar to one another. And then, of course, those sales start to diminish over time because the books are similar to one another, whether it's similar subject matter or whatever. People are suddenly publishing a lot of books about vampires, and then everybody's publishing books about vampires, and then suddenly nobody wants books about vampires at the moment. Things sway, right? And then I think numbers of books that are selling, and it's difficult to get review attention, makes it difficult for editors to feel confident in taking chances on writers, which makes it difficult on us. I think the other part of your question was, are there any upsides to being a debut right now? And I think there's always an upside to being a debut because you're fresh and you don't have a prior track. And I think that can be a lovely thing. There's nothing else. There's no first book that maybe didn't perform up to standard or got lost on a list to hold you back. And I think there's always a beauty to being a debut author. Even now, I think always there's a beauty to being a debut author.
There does seem to be more discoverability right now in ways that there hasn't been previously, mostly online, but one can find new writers, and it seems to revert the sort of presence and visibility seems to be bigger.
Good. We love an upside.
Yes. So, when all goes well and your clients land the deal and the book goes through editorial and it's time to start the marketing promotion, there's the B word, blurbing. Those little endorsements that seem to stir up a lot of angst and sometimes even controversy. How do y'all feel about the current state of blurbing? It's that bad?
No, I don't know. Not for me, and I don't feel for my clients particularly either. I feel like in the churn of social, there seems to be a lot of angst about blurbs, and I've observed that angst swing from be more gracious about your blurbs to don't ask me to blurb. Why are you bothering me? Or what's going to be the placement of my blurb and all of this. And maybe it's all of a sudden blurbing is being thought of in a much more honed in or scientific way, perhaps than I've thought of it. I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing, but I like to think about blurbing as an act of goodwill between authors. If you have the time and you like the work, you give a blurb, and after that you sort of let God, whether or not it ends up on the cover or whether or not it ends up on the inside pages or on the back cover. If you like a work and you believe in it, offer your blurb, put that goodwill out into the universe. And if you don't have the time or you're not able, then let it go. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the publishers really believe the blurbs are going to be the thing that sets the book up for success, and that it builds the buzz, and they can use the blurbs for marketing publicity, and they can get the sales force juiced up, and they can make social media assets and, get like the buzz kind of going. And they're not wrong. I've actually seen key blurbs have impact on the way the publisher starts to orient the book towards sales and marketing and the efforts that they put in. The problem is we all know it's a lot of labor for a small pool of writers who are constantly being asked. And so the more successful you are, the more blurb requests you're getting. And it's not sustainable. It's a full-time job then. And at some point there has to be boundaries around what an author can do. I think that a good rule of thumb maybe for an author is to give as many blurbs as they've received, and just to keep it equal, to keep the universe in balance. But I think that it's okay to sort of step back from having to blurb and feeling the responsibility of blurbing. And maybe it's also writers figuring out sort of what kind of writers they want to support, whether they're people that they have met at conferences or people they work with in writing programs, or authors whose work is in conversation with their own. There has to be some sort of boundary, I think, that an author needs to come to of what they are able to do.
Set the blurb boundaries, right?
I want to talk about a little bit about Dawnie. I think we're great blurbers. And I just want to be clear that we've never worried about where the blurb we've written for someone is going to be placed in their book. So Danielle's hypothetical is not me.
No, not at all. Not anyone on this podcast. It's just think pieces I have seen come up over the years.
Let's just clarify.
Right. Yes, to clarify, I was not referring to any participant in this podcast, more about the general conversation I saw taking place online. And I want to say it was even earlier in 2023. And I had that in my mind of the way authors were kind of thinking of or approaching blurbs. But you're right, Deesha, you are a fabulous blurber. You can teach a class on blurb structure. You're so good.
Dawnie and I talk about it was making sure we don't use the same words over and over again. Writing two little sentences maybe can take such a long time. But we do want to be good literary citizens and show that goodwill to authors, especially those who are debuting. So speaking of starting out, we should talk a little bit about how we all first connected, just to give some context for this. And I actually don't know the story, Dawnie and PJ, about how the two of you connected. So I'd love to hear how that came about.
Yeah, well, I mean, I will start it and then maybe PJ, you can pick it up. So I was at the Iowa Writers Workshop. And I was very adamant, actually, about not showing my work to agents yet because I felt like I wanted to finish it before I had any professional voices in publishing chiming in. But just before I graduated, Deshaun Charles Winslow, a wonderful human being and writer, author of In West Mills and Decent People, came up to me and was like, I really think you should meet my agent, PJ. And I said, oh, yeah. I'll do that when I get back to New York. And he was like, no, really, I think this is a match. I think this is great. And so I had kind of, when I came back to New York and I had a draft, I had finished, enough that it was time to start thinking about an agent. And I shared it with a couple agents and got some feedback that was a little disappointing. And then I sent it to PJ. And I'll let you pick it up from there. Because I'm curious to know, what you saw in it. What excited you about it?
Yeah. I had gotten an advanced email from Deshaun, who was describing the book, but it was very shorthand. And I was like, yeah, that sounds pretty cool. And I always try to prioritize references from clients, just because it's part of community building. And I feel like, the responsibility of attending to the client's relationships with others as well. And I don't know, Dawnie, your book, it's singular. It's it's so present on the page. It's rock and roll. It's punk rock. It's fuck you. It's it's all the things that I just really loved. And and it's ambitious, and hard. And I think that one of the things when we first met, I was like, I don't know, how easy the sale is going to be, but this is a great book. And, but I think that I also responded to kind of what you were doing with history and what was real and what wasn't, and mixing in pop culture with this fictional world. And but we also sat down and talked about kind of what the book needed,
Yes, and I loved, and we're going to talk about edit giving as an agent. I loved that. You just we just sat, we didn't talk about business. We talked about the book, and the note you gave me blew my mind because, so the whole second book of the whole second half of the novel is pretty different than the version that I gave to PJ. And it was your note that changed everything, PJ. And it was so funny. I don't think I ever told you this. I was also in conversation with a different agent who was sort of the second, something is off. I don't know what it is. I can't put my finger on it. I met with you. You gave me the note. I met with the other agent and I told her that note, not saying where it came from. And she said, yes, that's exactly it.
So now I'm going to go to this other agent.
Phew.
Yeah, but pretty much I knew after we sat down that you were my person for sure.
Yeah, I think that there's this thing. I mean, Danielle, you probably feel this as well, but there's a thing when you meet writers that there's just like the connection happens and you're like, even if the work needs work, like I want to figure out how to make this work because I feel bound to this relationship. This feels fated. This feels necessary. And that's, Dawnie, sort of how I felt when we sat down. I mean, I can almost recreate visualize the scenes, of just sitting there and also that conversation. And it was risky because I was like, by the way, the second half of your book needs to totally change. And you just sort of, said like, okay, I'll think about that. But we're considering it in a way that wasn't defensive or dismissive. It was like, you really were considering it. And it was kind of a risk for both of us, right? Which was like a risk for me to say it because you could have been like, no way, this isn't the book. And a risk for you to sort of like take that leap and see where the book could go. So
I love that idea of taking a risk on each other. Yeah. Danielle, what about you and Deesha?
Ooh, well, we can definitely talk about that. Wait, I got distracted though. Can I ask a question of PJ before we move on to our story, Deesha?
Please.
Because you had mentioned when you read Dawnie's book that you thought, well, this may be this might be tricky, but I want to do it. And you felt connected with her. And that, you're right, that feeling of connection with an author and going, well, this might be a challenge, but it doesn't matter because this book needs to exist in the world. It's such a real feeling. And I think one of the most exciting parts of being an agent actually is saying, oh, can we make this work? But then my question for you is, was it a challenge to sell it? Was it more of a challenge or less of a challenge than you thought it was going to be?
Good question.
I mean, look, it's still a business, and so I'm not going to take on anything that I don't think can sell, right? Yeah. So I think that I thought that the form, because it was an oral history, that it may be a barrier to some editors, and I think that we found that for some editors it was. They just didn't get it. But the thing that I was kind of riding the momentum of my feeling of the book was the same thing that when the editors turned up and we had meetings and then we had an auction was the same thing. I mean, it was they were tapping into that same electrical current and just sort of going with it, Yeah. So, but I like a challenge and yeah.
Thank you for that. I was just curious. I love that feeling. I love that spark feeling. It's the best feeling.
Thanks for listening to this sneak preview of our latest member bonus episode. To hear the rest of it, become an Ursa member in Apple Podcasts or by going to ursastory.com/join.